Well, good afternoon. Good afternoon, colleagues. Good afternoon, everyone. It's really good to see so many people joining us this afternoon. Yeah, I'd like to welcome you all to our webinar this afternoon on teacher development and AI. And we're delighted to be joined by Professor Miles Berry of the University of Roehampton, where Miles is Professor of Computing Education. My name's John Gordon. I'm a Professor of Language Learning and Education here at the University of East Anglia, where I'm also the Principal Investigator for our research into enhancing teacher agency with technology, for which this is our very first webinar in a series which will continue into next year. So we warmly invite you to join us for future events as well, and to join our network exploring teacher agency with technology. We're some months into research which explores teacher agency across many dimensions of practice, including assessment, online safety, information literacy, and of course teacher development, among many other aspects. Our aim is to inform practice, and we believe our findings will be relevant across the 4 nations of the UK. But in terms of the design of our research, we're focused on a place-based approach to teacher agency, looking closely at the use of technology in context and how micro-level details, there's very small but important details of how we work and where we work affect what we're able to do with technology. Throughout the session, the presentation and responses to questions will be recorded. So if you do happen to have a camera on, you may prefer to turn it off. I don't think there is anyone with a camera, so I think we're okay in that respect. In terms of audio, that's not available for anyone other than Miles or myself, but we welcome your questions in the chat, and we'll share those with Miles towards the end of the session. And I'll comment a little bit more on our programme and how you could become involved with our research at the end of the session. So now over to a brief introduction for Miles. We're absolutely delighted, Miles, that you can join us. Miles is an experienced teacher and academic, currently chair of the National Centre for Computing Education's Academic Board, and also of the England Computing Education Committee. Miles has also contributed to the National Curriculum Programmes of Study for computing, to numerous programmes of teacher development, to assessment frameworks, to resourcing and resource design, and to international curriculum development. Given that background, that expertise, I know Miles's presentation today will be informative and thought-provoking as he addresses an issue that I'm sure we all recognise as important, but perhaps don't always know how to respond to it. Indeed, in our research so far and conversations with teachers, colleagues have described AI as the elephant in the room, something that we all know we need to respond to, but just don't, in some cases, maybe don't know where to start. So Miles, thank you ever so much for joining us today, and over to you. Thank you, Miles.
John, that's really very kind. There will be a short pause now whilst I faff around with technology, as we do on these occasions. So hopefully you're seeing my slides up on the screen now. I'm just going to move all of you over to this screen so you don't get in the way. Right, it is a joy to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation. John has given me a very kind introduction there, but if he hadn't, I'd have got the machine to do one for me. It hasn't actually made anything up here. This is kind. It tends to err on the side of kindness rather than truthfulness. But on this occasion, it's managed to do just about both of those. It's missed out lots of the really important detail. Like, I spent the first 18 years of my career as a school teacher, much of that time as an ICT coordinator. I did 3 years as a head teacher, which really was quite enough, thank you very much. I've now been at Roehampton for 15 years. I run our secondary PGC in computer science, and my employer is generous. They let me out to do other interesting things, some of which John has already hinted at, so I'm not going to repeat that. Right, three things I want to talk about with you in the next, I don't know, 40 minutes or so. We'll see how the time goes. Firstly, how generative AI can support teachers in their working lives. So mainly a focus there on the actual teaching bit. Really, it's more about lesson preparation than teaching there live in the room, but I'll also nod in the direction of assessment. I want to think about trainee teachers and issues around academic integrity, which is very close to the top of our minds at Roehampton. And then I'll loop back and think about what happens after they've qualified as a teacher and the contribution that AI can make to their ongoing professional development. So that's roughly where I'm heading with this. So how can these generative AI tools such as ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude help? They are ludicrously well read. They have read pretty much all of the books. They have read all of the content on the internet and kind of can draw on all of that content. They do write very, very well. They have their own particular style at the moment, but they are quite articulate when it comes to written text. Generally, if I'm faced with a couple of essays, one of which seems to be much, much better written than the other, then I am tending to the view that the very well written one was probably produced by an AI. Your experience may be different. They are pretty good at taking on different roles. You can engage them in role play, which is quite good fun, both in the classroom and as part of that sort of professional development process. If they get stuck, if you set them a maths problem or something which isn't just about predicting the next word to put down, they're very happy to write some code in order to do that. And that makes coding a thing which is very, very accessible to people who have not yet learned how to program. I don't want to say that they are creative, but they are pretty good at thinking of things that we, or at least I, don't. So that thing which you do in primary lesson planning of let's gather a group of teachers around a table and work on some curriculum plans, lesson plans together. The AI can contribute very positively to that, of coming up with ideas which you might not have thought of yourself. As I say, their default persona is to be helpful. Given the choice between helpful and truthful, it will default to being helpful. And that's not always the helpful thing to do, to be fair. So the Department for Education, bless it, say that teacher workload is an important issue. We are committed to helping teachers spend less time on non-pupil facing activities. Isn't that a joy to read? And we see so much evidence of this from the DFE themselves about, all of the time we get to spend with the pupils rather than doing paperwork and things. And so there are many, many ways in which AI can contribute to that. We have now a number of these sort of point and click tile-based interfaces. This is the very wonderful TeachMate AI, which sits as an interface between the teacher and, I think in this case, GPT-4, the large language model itself. So you want the lesson plan there, you click on the tile, you say, this is for year 4, this is for history, this is about Alfred the Great, and it will go off and spin up a lesson plan there. It's using the large language model GPT-4 in the back end, but it then presents the content back to you. I don't think you need to use the point and click interface. I think we've got now a system that will interact naturally with us humans. It speaks literally our language. So we don't need to use the tile-based interfaces. You can create the prompt yourself. DFE asked teachers how you were using this over the summer of 2023, and of course lots of teachers want to respond to DFE consultations over the summer holiday and gave that sort of 7 bullet point list there. I think the only one that surprised me was teachers saying they were using this live in the classroom. I think that's really quite inspiring. And then at the bottom you have this notion of using generative AI to proofread, to edit, to improve written content. And there is that interesting question about, do you start with the stuff that you've written yourself and ask the AI to do this better? Or do you get the AI to do the first draft and then you sort of polish that for it afterwards? I'll leave that as a question for you. Okay, I want to walk you through the lesson planning process. So rather than just clicking that TeachMate, create me a lesson plan tool, how would I go about doing this? With the generative AI, in this case, this is ChatGPT, in much the same way as I would ask my trainees to create lesson plans. I have learnt after 15 years at Roehampton that going in to the lecture and saying to them, write a lesson plan, doesn't produce particularly brilliant lesson plans. And the same is true with the artificial intelligences, that if you just say, make me a lesson plan, it will do that, but you can get it to produce a much better lesson plan by walking through the same process as I would do with my trainees, as you may well do yourself or with your colleagues. So I've attached the English primary history curriculum. I like to teach an engaging lesson on Alfred the Great for pupils aged 9 to 10. What should my learning objectives be? Which is exactly the question I would start with if planning a lesson or getting my trainees to plan a lesson. What do you want the kids to actually learn? And it comes up with a really pretty good list, I think. I'm not a primary history teacher, of 4 possible objectives. And there's a nice blend there of primary content and that sort of secondary historical skill. So I quite like item 2 there, exploring Alfred's legacy. I think that's quite a nice one to work with. I also get my trainees to think about the misconceptions that the kids might have about a particular topic. So I'll get GPT to do the same thing. What are pupils, missed the apostrophe there, doesn't seem to mind, common misconceptions about this topic? And it gives me a good list. You see what I mean about it thinks of things that we don't always. I love item 3, oversimplification of Vikings as purely villains. Vikings are people too. Remember, tolerance for those with beliefs different to your own. And then I get into, okay, let's actually think of the lesson activity here. I'm less bothered about filling in the form, but just tell me what you want the kids to do. So I give it the very, very wonderful ITT core content framework. The attached captures government policy on effective teaching. Look at standards 2, 4, and 5. Suggests some lesson ideas based on active learning that aligns with the guidance. I want to address that particular idea of exploring Alfred's legacy. At this point, it gives me 2 possibilities, and I like the way that I feel as though I am helping train the next version of the model there. You know, you make your own choices. I think I went through response 2, and I love this idea of reenactment of Alfred's council. I think that could be a very, very fun, engaging, sticky, memorable year 4 history lesson. So that's the one I'm going to go with there. Of course, I don't think PowerPoint slides are the be-all and end-all of an effective lesson. And we did want to actually spend some time reenacting the council. But if I want a set of slides, it will do me a set of slides. So I say, OK, take this idea of a lesson. Now, from this, create me a PowerPoint presentation. It produces text. And then I issue the sort of magical invocation. Now make that into a .pptx file, at which point it goes off and writes some code to take its previous response and spin that up into a set of PowerPoint slides and allows me to download that. And of course, I immediately just apply one of PowerPoint's custom built-in themes to that. And I've got something which gives me an idea of what I'm going to do with the class and can put on the interactive whiteboard or whatever. You could do this all without the slides, but I know a lot of teachers feel that they have to have slides for good or ill. Other tools are out there, and it's possible we've got somebody on the call who has joined us from Oak National Academy. Oak have this quality assured repository of so many of these lesson plans and lesson resources built up during the pandemic from very, very good sources, some of the best teachers in the country. And what Oak have done now is train their own. So it's a custom version of GPT. It's a fine-tuned GPT based on that quality-assured library of content. And so they have now this Isla lesson planning tool. So I go in there. How do I create a lesson with Isla? I want Key Stage 2 History, Alfred the Great. It says, oh, I've done that already. Here are 3 lessons that actual human beings have written. But I click on the Continue button and say, OK, you go and make me a new one about Alfred the Great. And it comes up with a beautifully formatted lesson plan there with Oak's classic approach to take the hour long of the lesson and break it into 3 learning cycles. I think I got it on a bad day, and it gave very, very strange titles for the learning cycles. But the key learning points and the misconceptions is very much the process I would go through with my trainees and what you saw me doing with GPT itself. And it produces a very nice, very decent set of slides. Currently little grey boxes in there because it's not spinning up pictures to go in there. But of course, there are other tools to put illustrations into the slide. Some of you, I'm sure, are working in schools where knowledge organisers are seen as a very, very important resource, a good set of notes for pupils to revise from, for pupils to learn from. And, there is a lot to be said for teachers writing the knowledge organiser themselves. There really is. But, history may not be my thing. The Anglo-Saxons may not be my period, but create a knowledge organiser for this topic, ensure that it's accessible for pupils aged 9 to 10. And we get a pretty decent thing out of this. I don't think there are hallucinations in there, but as I say, I am not a historian or a history teacher, but I think it's done a pretty good job with that. And then, of course, we've got our end of topic test there, and I think a lot of teachers are using it already for producing assessment materials. It's pretty good at doing the distractors for multiple choice questions, particularly if you prompt well. So here's a pupil-friendly assessment worksheet for Alfred the Great, incorporating retrieval practice, critical thinking and creativity, following the core content framework for Standard 6, which is the sort of thing I would hope that new teachers were able to do for themselves, if only they had the time to do this properly. So I've got my retrieval practice stuff, got a little bit of criticality going in there. Why do you think Alfred wanted to make there fair laws for his people? What might have happened if there were no laws? And then we have, an opportunity for some creativity. And thankfully on this occasion, it's not done. Make a poster about this, which has got to be a good thing to many trainee teachers. We talked a little about the live use in lessons, and I'm not going to spend time sort of powering up Gemini and role-playing with pretend Alfred the Great now, but it is so good at taking on these roles. Look at what it says there in the top one. Come, tell me a tale, ask a question, anything your heart desires. Let's see what mischief we can get into. It gets this idea of engaging pupils. Is this better than bringing in an actor to take on the mantle to role play Alfred the Great? No, of course it isn't. Is it better than you as a teacher taking on this role? Probably not. But it's there, ready when you want it. And I think this makes things a little bit more engaging. Did you burn the cakes? Well, who knows, really.
If I'm so sorry. Sorry, Miles. We've lost your presentation somehow.
Oh, okay. A long time ago.
Right. Moments ago.
Okay,
just now.
Right. Okay, I'm sorry about that. I'm glad you stopped me, because I would have just carried on.
I'm so sorry. You were in full flow.
Teacher development. So hopefully you get to see Notebook Guide, Asser's Annals of the Reign of Alfred the Great on screen.
Absolutely, clear as a bell. Thank you so much.
So much. This
sorry
happens to be in Teams. So if you've not played with Notebook LM yet, play with Notebook LM. It's a very tight, well, no, because it's using the whole of Gemini in the back end there to do the writing, but it's a fine-tuned version of Gemini based on particular texts that you give it. So I've taken, what is this? This is J.A. Giles's translation of Asser's Annals of the Reign of Alfred the Great, not typically source material I would use in Year 4 history lessons, and asked it to read all of this, and then I can ask particular questions about this, but I can also get it to produce a podcast version of this. I'm not going to play it now, but it has these two incredibly enthusiastic Americans that get very, very excited about whatever text you give it. Keeping children safe in education, they'll get excited about that too. And that sense of making complex material very readily accessible, for my mind, is just such a powerful use of this. And then, of course, we get to, well, we've learnt all about Alfred the Great now, but it's going to be really hard to remember this for the test. If only Taylor Swift had written a song about Alfred the Great. So this is the moment of truth with the technology. Here we go, folks.
Way back in time in 87, the king rose high beneath the English sun. Alfred the Great, with his wisdom bright, fought Viking foes with all his might.
I know there are many on the call who would rather listen to that than me, but tough, I'm going to move on. Oh, no, moving on. Right, okay. So lots and lots of ways to use this for resources in lessons and for doing all of that. What am I going to teach? You're preparing for the lesson rather than necessarily just planning the lesson. I just want to link to the other big thing that teachers have to do, that idea of assessment there. We're on difficult territory from a perspective of intellectual property and privacy here. So here is an example from an exam board's examiner's report of text written by a child. So I can take a photograph of that with my camera, beam that to the language model and say, give me some feedback on this, particularly suggest areas in which I could improve on this, give me some targets to address there. It is fine for a child to do that over the age of 13 or 18, depending on the language model, because it is their work. It's another matter for us as teachers to do that with work that they have done, because there are intellectual property issues, there probably are data protection issues in there as well. I kind of feel as a teacher, it should be me who's providing feedback. However, the feedback that they get from the language model is likely to be much, much more detailed than most of us as teachers ever have time to do, which is sad. The Department for Education have funded a pilot to see whether the AIs can help with something like marking Year 4 English work. So we have screenshots of a tool that they have funded the development of here. Tell us what the title was for the essay, upload the student's essay or paste in the text of the student's essay. The first thing it does is that sort of secretarial red, blue, green underlining that we see in word processors. And it takes those errors at the appropriate level for Year 4 and then spins up the teacher feedback. And you'll notice that the teacher feedback there is significantly longer than the actual pupil essay. And then feedback for the student themselves in more accessible language. Item 2, using a and an. Remember, we use an before words that start with vowel sounds. So I think it's really interesting that the DFE want to fund this sort of saving teachers time, using AI to help with those sorts of tasks. When it comes to summative assessment and the work of our awarding organisations, the exam boards, Ofqual's guidance is clear that they have to have people marking exams still. They cannot just outsource that high-stakes summative assessment to the AIs and just trust the machine to produce the grade. So there are issues with this sort of use of the tool in assessment. Okay, which then leads me very nicely on to, okay, what about in higher education? What about my students training to become teachers and this issue that so many of us working, particularly in the university sector, face of just, they get the machine to write the essay rather than doing it themselves. Coming back into the school sector for a moment, JCQ's, the Association of the Awarding Organisations guidance is clear that schools cannot accept work for assessment unless they know it to be the student's own, which puts all of the responsibility on the head teacher and indeed on the teacher's shoulders for making sure that the work is the student's own. That's quite a responsibility. When Ofqual asked the exam boards, do you think there's a lot of malpractice now that we've got the AIs, the awarding organisations, the exam board said, no, there's a few isolated incidents. And of course, no child is going to say, I cheated. No teachers are going to say, I think my pupils cheated. No centre is going to say, yes, loads of our pupils cheated. And thus no exam board is going to report to Ofqual that, yes, lots of our candidates cheated. So I don't know how robust this evidence is. You will have, I'm sure, your own views. So Roehampton has yet to receive its invitation to join the Russell Group, but the Russell Group has done a really good piece of work around principles for AI in higher education. And I think a lot of schools could learn from the approach that universities have taken here. Item 4 on their list, universities will ensure academic rigour and integrity is upheld. And that's not an easy thing to do. So this was handed in to me as a draft for my comment last year. So they gave me this and said, can you give me some feedback on my draft assignment? I was a little surprised that on the cover page, they had not put their name or the university's name or indeed the date. They appear to have left that in square brackets, which makes me a little bit suspicious, it's fair to say. And then I get this text here, which starts talking about that they were using this in writing assignments and they were doing this in maths lessons, when I know full well that this is a student who is teaching computing in a secondary school. And I have this then from a colleague. I think this is a case of serious academic misconduct. If you read this essay, which is a different one, It's not based on the student's experience in school. It refers to teaching maths, science, English. It's peppered with American references and GPT-0. This suggests the following. I don't think, this is an experienced colleague, I don't think I have ever read such a problematic essay. Turnitin is clearly not showing students that their work is troubling. Turnitin won't spot this sort of cheating. So what do we do as a university? Well, clearly, we're going to treat this as cheating. This is academic misconduct. It's either falsification or it's plagiarism, but either way. Why do they do this? Well, I think academic misconduct is very similar to fraud, that there is some sort of motivation to do this. They want to qualify as a teacher. They want a good grade in their qualification. But there's also this sense that they think they will get away with it, that they have convinced themselves that the AIs are so good at writing that nobody will ever suspect that it's not the student's own work. We do, of course. But also that they've managed to convince themselves that this is okay, that there's a rationalization for doing this, that they managed to come up with some sort of argument which makes this seem acceptable to them. And I want to try and address that with my trainees, with our students, and removing that sense of it will be okay to do this because, and I think my argument rests on the idea that the assignment isn't really only or mainly about assessment. The assignment is the opportunity for them to learn, that this is where so much of the learning on our courses occurs. It's not just as an assessment of what they have learned, but it's set as a task so that they will learn. That's a very, very different thing. I've got my work cut out to persuade them of this. We come back to Seymour Pappert's work that we learn best when we make things to show to others, that this is how the learning happens. Not making the thing to show what you have learned, but through making the thing, you actually do learn things. Rory Sutherland says it so well. He says that, nobody ever goes back and reads their undergraduate essays. These are not publishable things, apart from very few exceptions. It's the process, not the product, that matters for this work. And I want to try and persuade my students that that's what, that's part of what they are paying for in these courses, is the opportunity to have feedback on this work, that they have learned these things. I'm going to skip on rather than watching this. So where we've got to now is, rather than worrying too much about citations for stuff which may or may not be taken from the AI, we would very much like them to acknowledge all of the help they've received. If they've got help from their tutors, if they've got help from other people, then that should be there right at the top of the essay. Similarly, the way they have used the AIs to support them in coursework is something which they should acknowledge. And as a team of staff, we've come to the right. I'm hoping you can still hear me.
Yes, we lost you just momentarily, but you're back again, so
I
that's
got a little
brilliant.
notification said that the microphone had stopped working. Good. I will carry on. Okay.
Thank you.
Yes.
All
Unless
good.
it's being done under exam conditions, then we really have to assume that there has been some use of AI. GPT-0 and the other tools aren't sufficiently reliable at finding this, and the problem with there's far too many false positives. So we start with the assumption that they will use these tools. We do not ever want them to pass off the work of the AI as if it were their own. And so our hope is that this acknowledgement process gets us there. We shall see. Okay. We've got like this 3-level diagram. So some of the time, absolutely no use of AI other than to prepare for it. When it's a case of my trainee teachers on placement in school, no problem with them using the AI to help with the lesson planning process, but they're not going to have the robot teaching the lesson for them anytime soon. For most of our coursework, it's that level 2 thing here. We want the AI use to be acknowledged. If they're quoting from it directly, there needs to be a citation, but that's our expectation for most coursework. Sometimes, occasional modules, then there will be an expectation that they actually do have to use the AI because these are going to be important skills for them for the future. This really lovely idea from Anthony Selden about, look, the problem is that the AI comes along and just makes all of this so incredibly easy that the things that we remember from our own school days, from our time at university, is the stuff that we struggled with. And if there is no struggle, if there's no challenge there, then how much learning actually happens? And many of you will know the Willingham quote about, what is it? I've got it on the screen. Memory is the legacy of thought, that unless you are thinking, the chance of actually remembering anything is really significantly reduced. Okay, so let me wrap up now by thinking a little about how this can support teachers in becoming better teachers in the process is professional development there. So the first thing is just turning the transcription on. There is a very real danger of losing the audio at this point, but I hope you've all managed to play with the text, speech-to-text tools that are built into so many of these things now and just been amazed by how good they are without any sort of specific training, like I have to read this passage like we had with Dragon Dictate back in the old days. I can just turn this on and get the transcript of what I'm saying. And you can, of course, upload that to Office 365. You can do that inside a Google document and have the transcription of whatever is happening at the time, from a recording, from a video, from wherever. I'm going to turn that off because I find it very distracting. There we go. So getting the text from a conversation, and there are so many powerful ways of using that, of course. So I record almost all of my lectures, and thus can get the transcript. I can pass that transcript to ChatGPT and ask for advice or an analysis of my teaching. And of course, all teachers can do this. My trainees can do this. People in classrooms can do this. People in meetings can do this. So here is the analysis of how I was using questioning in one of the lectures I gave at Roehampton. And then I go really specific and tell me how I could use questioning better. And I get 5 actionable points there. I don't know if it's me, but I feel much, much more comfortable having the machine give me this advice than inviting colleagues to come and sit at the back of my lecture room and take notes and tell me how I could teach better. I feel more in control of this. And it's going to be really interesting seeing the extent to which trainees will start to make use of this sort of feedback on their lessons, and indeed colleagues post-qualification in school, getting that sort of analysis and suggestions for how to teach better. We role-played or I didn't role-play, but I showed you the role-play as if it were Alfred the Great earlier. You can, of course, get it to role-play as other things too. So getting it to role-play as a stroppy teenage computing student, while teaching a lesson on coding, several students start browsing social media on their laptops. Never happened in any of my trainees' lessons, instead of focusing them on task in hand. And preparing for that in advance, role-playing against the computer, it feels very gamified, but thinking what you would do in these circumstances. Of course, once upon a time, we would role-play with one another, but the machine is very good at explaining its reaction there. And then the preparing for difficult conversations. So Mrs. Cooper turns up. Why is my daughter always the one getting into trouble? It's like you've all decided that she's the problem before she even walks into the room. I had enough of this kind of treatment when I was at school. I won't let you do the same thing to her. Why don't you ever listen to her side of the story? It's not fair. You're supposed to be helping her, not making things worse. And this, okay, now what do you say? So many of us will have been in situations like that, and preparing for those situations in advance by just role-playing and thinking what would I say that would make this better rather than worse? Okay, I kind of need to just skip forward. So then the helping with the things you are interested in, and then this sort of moves into a researchy mode, but this is very much the more sort of teacher as researcher, teacher interested in improving their practice. So, there's this whole thing about turn the subtitles on when young children are watching CBeebies or iPlayer or YouTube or even Tickety Talk, I don't know. So I'm interested in the empirical evidence that addresses how the use of subtitles can support young children with reading in their first language. Can you suggest 8 papers I should read? I like the references in Harvard style, and it comes up with a really interesting list of 8 entirely plausible sounding titles. So let's probe on one of them. Great ideas, give me a summary of this one. Okay, and it gives me a very nice summary of this. What critique would you offer? And this is an interesting approach to, okay, there are issues with this particular one. Sample size was small. Okay, the information available from my previous search and summaries didn't explicitly state the exact sample size. To determine the exact number of children involved, you would need to access the original research paper itself, which makes me a little bit suspicious if I'm chatting with one of my master's students and they say, oh, I can't remember quite how many children. Are you sure this paper actually exists? He's so sure of itself, 70% confident that this paper exists. And of course, it doesn't exist. And I go back to my list of 8 entirely plausible sounding papers, and it turns out that the one I picked doesn't exist. The ones in green are actual papers. The ones in yellow, I think there is a paper, but it's made a mistake with the citation. So you can't really rely on this, but you can do this. You can say, I'd like to do some interviews with the kids about their experience. Can you think of some good questions to ask? How would you conduct these interviews? And it's done a pretty good job of that. I think this may be my last slide, you'll be pleased to know. So I heard Khan Academy talking about this at the RSA last June, and he said this, I think, very insightful thing about entering a post-scarcity world, that we're now at the point where if you want text written, if you want poetry written, if you want pictures produced, if you want code written, if you want Taylor Swift-style songs written, you can have all of that essentially for free. That yes, sometimes the people will produce better stuff than the machine produces. You might still want to pay for the really high quality stuff with that personal touch from your favorite authors. But just generic text, you can have as much of that as you want for free about pretty much anything you want. So there is some sense in which the economics of much media production is already broken, because there is, what are you actually paying for now? Khan says you have to be able to read and or code well enough to be able to put the AI generated pieces together. I think he is right about that. But there are likely to be other jobs that are very human focused in the future. So pupils who are spending their time at school thinking, when I leave school, I could be a lawyer, or I could be a GP, or I could be an accountant. I'm not absolutely certain that those jobs will be there for them in those so many years into the future. And so what then are our responsibilities as teachers? How should education work, given that employment is likely to be really quite different? For what it's worth, I think teaching is one of these very human-focused jobs, that if all we do as teachers is set work and mark work, then yes, we should be worried. But I don't think that is in any sense all that we do. We get kids excited about learning something they're not already excited about. And we teach them how to be human beings. And I hope that it's a long way off before the machines would be as good as us at doing that. We have some time for questions. The slides are all online if you want to see them, as is my email address if you want to contact me directly. I'm going to stop sharing the screen now and bring you back in front of my display. Hi.
Thank you very much, Miles. That was really, really insightful and packed. So thanks very much. I have a couple of questions.
Good.
What do you think the implications for computing education are in terms of the 2014 national curriculum and so on?
Okay, so we didn't build any AI into the 2014 edition, but there is enough scope in there to encourage the teaching of AI. So there is one of the 4th aims is to be able to use new and emerging technologies analytically and critically. I forget the exact phrasing after all these years, but it's definitely covered by the aims of the curriculum. And, even key stage 1, we have common uses of IT beyond school. That has to now surely include, I don't want to say their names out loud in case they're listening, but the Siris and the Alexas and the Google Assistants that are in so many kids' bedrooms. They should have an understanding of what that can do, what it can't do, that it's not a person, and be thinking through, do I actually want this listening to me whilst I'm talking to my parents about something horrible that happened or something good that happened to me? There are privacy issues around these technologies as well. So yeah, if we were doing it now, and we may, you never know, there may be an opportunity to do it all again properly. I'm sure that some sort of critical AI literacy, as well as being able to use AI productively, would be part of a shopping list if we were writing a curriculum now.
Thank you very much. So do you see critical AI literacy different to digital literacy?
Well, I don't think it is going. It's a particular aspect of that, isn't it? So some of this is about understanding how these things work. I used to illustrate this into the foundations, applications, implications diagram in terms of how does Google search work? Well, in part it's the PageRank algorithm, in part it's you type things in and click the button, but it's also about having a very detailed profile of users and knowing what they are interested in. And there are privacy issues there. And there's also a whole business model about how can they appear to do all of this for all of us for free. So that would be part of digital literacy. When you add on top of that Gemini or ChatGPT or whatever, it's going to be a similar sort of question. But the underpinning technologies are different, and there are huge implications. The Anthony Seldon thing about unless you work hard at it, what chance have you of learning anything, wasn't really part of Google search in the past or digital literacy in the past, but it's now something we need to be acutely aware of. That is this actually a good thing? Okay.
Super, thank you so much. I cannot see any more questions in the Q&A.
Oh, that's okay then.
So thank you so much, Miles. I'll just pass back to John. If you'd like to share your screen again. Oh, there's a new post.
Sure.
Hang on.
So
hang on,
question.
I'm so sorry. There's one more question. Thank you, Conal. We're all rushing around learning to use these tools. Are we doing enough to prepare for life with AI, especially in the eventuality of the AIG and AI? Are they smarter than us?
I think so. There, this whole sense of there being existential threat to this. It's one of those things which I try very hard not to worry about. And, is there anything that I as an individual can do about this? The whole climate catastrophe stuff, going vegetarian here would do no harm. It would help a bit. Schools going vegetarian for their catering, probably of greater impact, but stopping the AIs from taking over our world, it seems too big a thing for any individual to cope with. So there are societal obligations on there, and I don't know as we're doing anything as a culture, as a society, to think through, is this something that we actually want? Because look how cool the shiny toys are. I can have a conversation with Alfred the Great. Isn't that fabulous? Rather than, if we keep doing this, then what future is there for humanity? So I think thinking through the privacy issues and the impact on learning and the business model, and yes, the carbon cost of these things, that feels within scope. But existential threat to our species feels way too scary to start thinking about that. So yeah, Connell, I kind of feel let's just get good at using this and a little bit more critical of the output and thinking about whether we should use it or not, rather than worrying about how we will cope when the AIs take over the world. Seems the only thing which most of us can do. I may come to regret saying this, but if I come to regret saying this, then it's going to be too late to do anything about it. So sorry.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, I'll hand back over to you now, John.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Miles.
Oh,
there you are.
Thank you. Thanks ever so much, Miles, for your presentation. Really, really thought-provoking, really informative for everyone. So, yeah, we really appreciate you joining us, sharing that expertise, highlighting many potential uses of AI, but also some of the related issues, including as just addressed in that final response as well. From the point of view of our project as well, our current research, it's also very interesting in terms of the theme of agency, where clearly some of the uses you've described at some points suggest surrendering agency, teachers having to surrender some agency, but also exercising it very skillfully in terms of how colleagues might prompt AI, or any of us working in education might prompt AI and evaluate what it generates. So thank you ever so much, Miles, for joining us. And I'd also like to thank Helen, who has set up the webinar today, liaised with Miles to prepare the event as well. So thank you very much, Helen, and for setting up the Q&A opportunity as well. Just before we conclude, for colleagues, just to come back to a little bit more detail on our research. So I've shared the screen there that shows you our webpage. We'll share the address in the chat for you as well. But it's really important in our research for us that we do reflect teachers' experiences of using technology. That's what we're trying to understand through our research. And there are different ways you can engage with our research, and the website is the easiest way, first of all, to connect with us. So if you were to click on the About tab, or through the National Survey link here, you'll come to these details. Yeah, we would really welcome you, really appreciate you completing our survey. It takes around about 10 minutes to complete, quite wide-ranging questions of your experiences of using technology. But we also have a national network, so if you can register for that, we will share with you updates about our research, bulletins, and particularly into next year, we'll be able to share findings for you, details of events, further webinars, face-to-face events in Norwich and Norfolk, and in the bottom half of the screen as well, you'll find details of how you can get involved if you're a teacher or a school leader in Norfolk. And in terms of our continuing research activities, there's a brief summary there. At the top are 3 key research questions, and in the lower half, an indication of the thematic strands that we're exploring. And particularly at this stage in the project, if you have an interest in being involved in our work around assessment technology and also resourcefulness around technology, if you were to join or influence the design of technology, what would you want it to do for you if you had that opportunity from the very beginning? What would you look for in effective EdTech? Again, we'd really welcome your participation in those areas of the research. So please do join us and visit our website for more details. But finally, thank you everyone for joining us. And yeah, we hope to see you again, maybe at some of our future webinars. And thank you once again, Miles, for joining us this afternoon. It's really appreciated. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you very much. Thanks everyone.